Just let me start by saying welcome. Welcome to our February show. Amazing how quickly the winter seems to be going, at least for some of us. We haven't got much snow down where I am in Plymouth, Massachusetts, but in other parts of the country and state, I'm sure they think the winter has already been on too long. So hopefully we see some signs of spring pretty soon. Just a couple quick notes. We did have our board meeting this morning. And it looks like everything's getting all set for a big Photographica show in April, be April 20th. One thing some of you may not be aware of, probably most of you, is Henry Weisenberger, who's a longtime member of our society. He passed away a few years ago. And it turns out he had a pretty large collection of cameras. And his family has asked us to help us dispose of his collection. So we just picked it up this week. It's probably somewhere around 700 cameras that we got. And some of those are going to be put out for sale at the Photographica show on April 20th. So, and Henry has some nice stuff. So if you're interested in maybe seeing some new stuff at PHSNE, by all means, come out for the April 20th show. There's an interesting show coming up at the Charles River Museum. That's on February 23rd. They're going to be talking about 3D photography. There's George Mueller and Bernard Fishman. They'll be giving presentations on 3D photography. So that should be a really interesting show. 18th century, of course. Finally, I just want to say we had a very nice meeting, Zoom meeting with our counterparts in Michigan. Chuck Fell and Bill Kristen joined us, and we talked about maybe areas where we could collaborate. There seems to be a lot of overlapping interests in our two societies. So I just want to let you know that we'll be going forward with that, investigating some ways in which we could share our information to our members and everything. So that's all I have to say. And again, I welcome you. And I'm going to turn it back to Dana for the main presentation tonight. Dana?
Thanks, John. Welcome everyone to our February presentation. Before I welcome our presenters, Trenton Carls and Maegan Squibb, just a few announcements. The active screen you probably saw is being recorded for YouTube. Please stay muted during the presentation and type your questions into the chat, which you will find at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do questions at the end. If you are looking at the top right corner of your screen, the best view for this presentation is speaker view. So if you go up to the top, it's a little grid of boxes and select speaker, that's the best choice for the presentation. And I think that's about it. If you have technical difficulties, please post them in the chat. We'll do our best to help you out. Our speakers tonight are from the Cape Ann Museum in Gloucester, Mass. Head librarian and archivist Trenton Carls and photo archivist Maegan Squibb were the driving forces behind the Above the Fold, the photographers of the Gloucester Daily Times, 1973 to 2005, which is on display at the Cape Ann Museum through March 17th, 2024. The collection is an estimated 1 million photographs, mostly 35 millimeter, and is a recent acquisition donated to the museum by the North of Boston Media Group, who are the owners of the Gloucester Daily Times. So more than 12 Gloucester Daily Times photographers are represented, and they have captured the people and the stories of Cape Ann over 3 decades. Local photojournalism and its role in the community, as well as the experiences of the photographers, are presented in the exhibit. So Trenton and Maegan, I'm turning it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, John, both for having us and for the introductions. And thank you, everyone who joined us this afternoon or evening on not Super Bowl Sunday. I am Trenton Carls. I'm the head librarian and archivist at the Cape Ann Museum. And
I'm Maegan Squibb. I'm the photo archivist at the Cape Ann Museum.
And between Maegan and I, somehow we curated an exhibition from about 1 million photographs. And During today's presentation, we're going to kind of show you our process from beginning to end. So we're going to go through a lot of different stages about how we got this collection all the way up to today, more or less, in which we're still talking about this show that's up for another 6 weeks. So hopefully we entice you to come and visit us. So let me start my slide here and share my screen. Okay, and is that presenting for everyone? Excellent. Okay, so here we are, from acquisition to exhibition, curating 1 million newspaper photographs at the Cape Ann Museum. So the Cape Ann Museum, for those of you who do not know us, we are located in Gloucester, Massachusetts. We have 2 campuses now. This is our downtown location that you're looking at, which is at 27 Pleasant Street, just around the corner from Main Street. And we have a second facility, the Janet and William Ellery James Center at the Cam Green, which is as you just first enter the town. And that's where our new collection storage facility is. And so when we first got these materials, that's where they were stored. So here is the library and archives that Maegan and I operate out of. I've been the head librarian at this museum for over 4 years now. And when we're not curating exhibitions, we like to hang out here. We average over 4,000 visitors each year. We are very conveniently located in the lower level of the museum. And so we get a lot of curious visitors who want to kind of just see what we're about and research their history, their house history, the maritime industry, the fishing industry, of course, as well as many of the great artists who have passed through our region. And at this point, I would like to pass it over briefly to Maegan, who can describe what this beautiful scene is that many of you may find familiar.
So what you're looking at is the photo archives. This was probably taken a little over a year ago. So I was hired on about 2 years ago, which plays a big role in the story that we're going to tell you. The photo archive, when I got there, was in a lot of need of organization. The prior photo archivist had passed away several years before, and the position had been dormant. So it was very much in need of some TLC. So after doing a preliminary inventory of the space, I would say there's about 250 distinct photo collections. In this room alone, we're probably looking at somewhere between 250,000 and 300,000 individual images. And I would say at last glance, we had well over probably 40 formats or so represented in this collection, dating back to, I think the oldest probably hits around 1860s, all the way up to present. So it's a large collection. This is aside from the Gloucester Daily Times, 1 million, and is, we're lucky to have it. It's a wonderful collection that documents just about every aspect of life on Cape Ann. And this, apparently I was working on the floor that day. Surface space is at a premium. So I was clearly going through some stuff and just felt it easier to work off the floor. But you can see some of the older items that we have. I think, if I'm right, some of those near the tin cans is some of our like amber types, daguerreotypes, tin types in those boxes there. So I was probably working on my inventory at the time.
So our story begins, as it pertains to this presentation, ironically enough, in 2004, so 20 years ago. At that time, the Gloucester Daily Times, which is the community's newspaper, reached out to the museum to inquire if we would be interested in the photographic negatives from longtime staff photographer Charlie Lowe. This is him the first month on his job in 1957. A few things I like to point out of this is you see the Remington typewriter, of course. You see his Graphilex speed graphic camera in hand. And I'm not sure, and I'd be interested to poll the group afterwards, if anybody recognizes the machine in the background. So that's a Klitschkograph machine. Say that a few times fast. And that is what they used to make the plates that would be put onto wooden blocks to be pressed onto the newspaper so they could have the photographic images before they could actually put the prints in there. So I'm curious to know if anybody knows much about that. So Charlie Lowe was the staff photographer for 24 years. He began using the large format from the camera that you see there, and by the late 60s and early 70s, transitioned into 35mm film. He used a Nikon F series camera, and his images were great, and they changed kind of the course of the newspaper's photographs from being very static events to being the more dynamic artistic shots that we come to see here in a moment. So back to 2004, the paper reached out to see if the museum wanted these images, and they perfectly aligned with the museum's mission, which was to tell about the art and the history and the culture of our community. And so we graciously accepted. There were about 40,000 captures in that collection alone. They spanned mainly 1974 to 1980. But there were lots of gaps. 1974, I think we maybe had January, February, and March, and then nothing else. So there are large amounts of gaps. So then just 5 years later, the museum mounted an exhibition called Charles A. Lowe Photos, Gloucester 1975. So the year 1975 was chosen for this exhibition because it was the only complete year. Like I mentioned, these gaps, they spanned the entire run from 74 to 1980. And so 1975 was the year chosen, and the exhibition ran month by month. And so it looked at what a month in the life of this photographer looked like, and really focused on this year in Gloucester's history. You might notice that I said that he was the photographer for 24 years, and I've just said maybe 6 years. Unfortunately, most of his material previous to this date is feared long lost. They don't know if he threw it out in a fit of rage, unhappy with his work, if it was an editor who was cleaning house and pitched it. There have been talks of fires, but unfortunately, this is one of those things that we just don't know. So the museum's exhibit in 2009 was hugely successful. Charlie Lowe's photographs very much captured the community. He was great at taking faces and people doing their day-to-day lives. So we flash forward to 2019, and I am 1 week on the job. I have been kind of a trial by fire situation. I remember that first Friday that I was on the job, somebody came in and offered up a donation of material that they wanted to put into the archive. And it was a relatively big box. It had 60 items or so in it. It had books and photographs and manuscripts. And I thought to myself after they left, this is going to take forever. I don't know how I'm going to get through all of these 60 items and get them into their homes that they need to be in. And then about half an hour later, a guy walked in with a backwards baseball cap, sunglasses on his hat, and a camera slung around his neck. He said, "My name is Paul Bilodeau. I am the photographer at the Gloucester Daily Times, and we would like to give you all of our photographs." And I said yes, enthusiastically, not knowing what I was getting myself into. And then over the course of the next 2 years, I found out exactly what I was getting myself into, which was the estimated 1 million photographs that they were giving to us. So work was delayed. Soon after this story ends there, we enter into the pandemic. And so this was definitely not a priority at that moment. But once that started to ease and we were able to get to work, we began our collection survey. And so the Gloucester Daily Times is located on Whittemore Street in Gloucester, which conveniently is just about a 3 or 4 minute drive from the museum. So I was able to go over there and kind of see what they had and what this collection was all about. What you're seeing here is just a couple of the more organized places that we came across. On the left is a cabinet in which the binders were relatively well sorted with the negatives within. The problem with this area, if you notice, is that it is directly in the sunlight. There are newspapers in that area that look like they are 100 years old, but they are just a couple. So everything that was happening in that space was definitely detrimental to the collection initially. And then on the right, you see one photographer's work. It says actually Amy Sweeney negatives in there. And so she was one of our favorite photographers to work with because she was just so organized and all of her dates and names were on those negatives. So these are some of the more enjoyable spaces. And these are more of the unenjoyable spaces. On the left, some of you may recognize that space. It is the dark room. that had been boarded up since about I guess probably about 2002. We cracked into it and found a few negatives laying on the floor, but when they initially closed it down, they did a good job of cleaning everything up. And on the right is the basement. And the basement was a particularly interesting place to search through for a wide range of reasons, but we were done packing everything up. We'd actually completed our assessment. We had grabbed every negative possible. And just before we were about to leave, the staff photographer who initiated this, Paul Bilodeau, said, let's go check the basement one more time. And so we did, and we went down, and on that wooden cabinet there that I've unfortunately blocked with this darkroom photo was a large stack of newspapers. And he, in a fit of joy and rage, knocked them all over. And underneath it were 6 more boxes of Charlie Lowe's photographs, which actually completed those gaps that I talked about earlier. So now we had a complete run of his photographs from 1973 to 1981. And that was important to us because he died in 1981, and we didn't have representation of his final year of work at the newspaper. So it was really great to have that in a moment of luck there. So soon after began our actual packing. Here you see a couple of the great library volunteers that helped with this project. We were also offered the clipping morgue, which included newspaper clippings, a lot of memos and letters to the editor. But most importantly, for this purpose, it included many of the prints that were made at the time, which would prove to be invaluable to our creation of the exhibition. So now we have the collection. We were able to bring on Maegan, like she said, just 2 years prior to this show launching. And her hiring was really instrumental in being able to do this work. From acquisition to exhibition opening, we had 2 years, almost on the dot. And so we really had to get rolling on this as soon as we could. So here we have them now housed at the Janet and William Ellery James Center. On the right, you're seeing all of the prints and the clipping morgue, a really substantial collection. We had some volunteers go through them and kind of cull out anything that was more of a manuscript type of material from the clipping files. The clipping files have been great for researchers, but we acknowledge that, once this is all digitized, all the newspapers digitized, these become a little bit less useful. And on the left, we have an initial kind of pass at trying to sort some of this stuff out. We really felt that we needed to get a sense of what we had and what we didn't have. And the first way to do that for us was to sort these by year, solely just saying, here's everything from 1980, here's everything from 1981. And here it is in a cleaner view. You can see a lot of these have great details. You're seeing Manchester, Essex, Contacts, 1981, Rockport. You start to see a few names trickling in. You see staff negs, you see mugs. And so this really helped us figure out what we were working with right off the bat. Maegan, do you want to talk a little bit about what I'm seeing here?
I definitely can. So in that, the last 2 images that you saw, those yellow Kodak boxes, most of them, when you open them, look like the image on the left. So they are, sleeved strips of 35 millimeter negatives. I would say on average, each sleeve probably has 4 strips or so. Some obviously have less, 1 or 2, and then some have quite a few, 8, 9, 10, depending on the photographer. Some of them were a bit more heavy-handed than others. For some of the photographers, each box, I would say, has about 10,000 individual frames. For someone like Amy Sweeney, who really loved to shoot, I would say a single box of hers, there's one that I'm digitizing right now that will probably come in at about 30,000 images in just one box. On the right-hand side are some of these sleeves laid out. You can see on the upper right-hand side, it's kind of blurry in these images, but what that is a stamp that we came to realize it has a date code embedded into each, which aided in us being able to not only organize the boxes chronologically, but to then go through and organize the sleeves within chronologically as one of our first steps. And then this is a follow-up to the last. So but prior to the show planning, with just focusing on processing the collection as a whole, like I just said, we started off by employing a lot of volunteers, help to organize the images chronologically, and then I began going through and digitizing. So again, before we even started planning, really diving into the planning of the show, I had digitized roughly, I would say about 15,000 images in the collection. And as I was going, as I was digitizing, I would then hand off bundles to volunteers who would then rehouse the strips into archivally safe materials. These sheets that you see here went into then a binder box, which are a much more safe and durable way of housing them than those fairly acidic sleeves that they've been living in. And then the Kodak boxes that are probably from the 80s. So on the left, you can see one of those binder boxes open, the strips happy in their new house. And then on the right-hand side are a few of the other binder boxes that have since been digitized and rehoused entirely. So it's just the tip of the iceberg, but it's a work in progress.
And I highly recommend these binder boxes. When
Yes.
I arrived, the Charlie Lowe collection that had already been accessioned by the museum were existing in just regular binders. And you start to see the slippage of those and then the curling that will happen. This allows them to be accessed, used, and found easily while still lying flat and great for preservation.
Yes.
So then began, well, as Maegan already mentioned, the scanning and the digitization. And Maegan, I don't know if you want to have anything else you want to talk about on this, or if we can hop straight to the digitization part of it.
No, we can go right into digitization. Yeah, that's fine.
On the right, you see our Epson scanner that we use. It's a 12,000 XL. It's a beautiful machine. It scans in bulk, and so we can fill it with, I think, 5 strips at a time, and then it will individually scan each image within it. So it puts a great product out, up to 2400 DPI, I believe, if we really want it.
We can go further than that, but that's usually our highest.
Which was very beneficial to us, as we'll see in the exhibit when we were making things a bit larger. So we realized that we wanted to share these images as efficiently with our community as we could. The previous photo archivist that Maegan has mentioned, Fred Buck, was very diligently scanning our negative collection, primarily our glass plate negatives. And during his time with the museum, he had scanned, I think, about 10 to 15,000 of those glass plate negatives, which was really great. They're not ones that you want to handle regularly, and to have that done and on a computer was really helpful. But that's where they lived, was on a computer. It was not a backed up computer. It was not an online database. And so we really started to have some nightmares about what would happen if that were to be lost. And so we worked with a company called Cortex that is a digital collections online portal, which we have been beginning to incorporate all of our digital content. So not just the photographs, but our manuscripts, our books, our maps, log books is a huge collection within there. And I'll share that link with you all later so you can browse through it. But this just kind of gives you a little bit of the back end process. So what you're seeing here is actually where our volunteers have stopped off. And so we have a great team of about 34 volunteers who dedicate their time to the library and archives at the museum. And they do a wide range of projects. But during this past 2 years, a lot of them have been focused on the Gloucester Daily Times. And so here you see they have started to rename these. So they actually have proper descriptions so they can be found. And then you see untitled towards the bottom, and it just has the date. Here would be the back end of this specific image at City Hall. And you can see that someone has now gone in and actually been able to identify most of these individuals. That's the other great asset about these volunteers, is that many of them are local, have grown up in the community, and know a lot of people in these photographs, which really made our job so much easier. And this is the front end of this specific collection. So I think to date, we have around 15,000 photographs digitized from the Gloucester Daily Times collection alone. Obviously, that is a far cry from the million, but we are getting there quickly. Now that our work on the exhibition is done, we have more time. So once we had this collection and once we began to scan it, we really realized that there was a story to tell here. You know, I mentioned that when we first got the collection, we were sorting it by date just to really tell what we had. But we started to see these names. You know, Amy Sweeney's one we've mentioned a few times. We would see names like Josh Reynolds, Jim Mahoney, and we started to realize that the story maybe wasn't necessarily just these 32 years worth of history, but maybe it was about these people who did this job. And so luckily, the Gloucester Daily Times, like any newsroom, is focused on tomorrow and rarely takes a moment to clean up their messes from the past. And so when we went into the newsroom to get the photos, we were also able to get a lot of great content that dated back to the entire period that this collection spanned. As you see on the right, there are mountains of newspapers. On the left was one pile of specific photographs by one photographer. That proved extremely helpful as we were going through and trying to find images for her section of the exhibit, because these were her favorites that she kept in a box, and ones that really meant something to her. And many of these photos ended up in the show. You also see that we have a couple newspaper racks on the right that we were able to incorporate in the exhibit as well. And so, you know, digging through these newspapers really lent a lot of insight into their process. The Gloucester Daily Times did a great job of highlighting their photographers as well. And so in many of these issues, there would be a my view, which is what they called something that, you know, one of the staff members would write about themselves. We were also extremely fortunate in that we had a lot of help from the newspaper also, and alumni from the newspaper. So Paul Bilodeau, this person I've mentioned a couple times that started this whole problem for us, had kept in contact with a lot of the people who had worked there previously. And he sent an email out to all the photographers fairly early on and said, hey, we're doing this project. Does anybody, you know, want to help? Does anybody have any images they can provide? How about your bio? And we got great responses that way. But two individuals in particular I do want to mention, and Jeff Pope and John Christie. Both of them were alumni from the paper during different eras. John Christie had worked during the 70s, 60s and 70s, and Jeff Pope had worked through the 80s through the 2000s. And between the two of them, they were able to really help us kind of guide the history of this newspaper, which was really excellent and impactful in our exhibition. So here we have on one table the backsides of all of the prints. The prints played a much more impactful role in this exhibit than I would have expected. Having all of the negatives, I thought that we would just be able to scan them all, look at them all on a computer, and put them up. But again, we had 1 million, and so that was really challenging. And what the prints allowed us to do was to make quick visual decisions when we were culling, you know, a photographer's body of work of 20,000 images down to 6. You could really start to feel how they played together when you were looking at their prints. Also, usually the best photographs were made into prints. A lot of the outtakes that are in the negatives that either never made it to print or just, you know, were never fully processed, you know, didn't make the cut to be done in print. So this was great. At this stage, I'm actually asking a volunteer to find me an interesting caption. And they actually didn't look at any of the fronts of the prints in this case, and they were just looking for something gripping. They ended up succeeding in that, and there was a Peter Piper poem on one of them, so that was fun. We also had the benefit of having a microfilm. And in some cases an online database for the newspaper. So what you're actually seeing in the front here is an issue from 1957. So 1957, two major things happened for the newspaper. They moved to the headquarters that they're currently located at, away from a very small office that they had been in, I believe, for about 70 or 80 years since the 1880s, into a new plant that they were able to expand, you know, do the production of the newspaper there. That photograph that I showed at the beginning of Charlie Lowe, that is from that same moment. They were able to hire their first full-time photographer, which was Charlie Lowe. And this newspaper was released as a souvenir edition in which they kind of outlined what their mission was, particularly as it pertained to photographs as well. So once we had a concept of what our story was going to be, and that story being focused on the photographers itself, we started to design our exhibit. You can see in the top left, these are my little chicken scratches of kind of where the layout should be. And on the bottom is a digital rendering that the museum's assistant curator, Leon Doucette, put together. So he was able to create this space, and it really helped us visualize how much room we were going to have. You know, there are a million photographs, and we would love to put all of them on the walls. But we couldn't. And so we wanted to be sure that we could get a good representation by each photographer, but also not overwhelm the visitor by just having, you know, hundreds of thousands. So that really helped us outline what we were working on. And then we put a lot of attention to the detail of designing the panels, the entryway, even as small as the captions for these photographs. Early on the back of those prints that you saw a couple slides back is this image from the bottom left. And that's what they used on the back of their prints to describe what was happening after they made it, to make the reporter's job easier, to make the editor's job easier. And so they would write their information in there. And so we actually duplicated that, and that's what became our caption on the walls of the exhibit. And on the right, you see an early draft of Mitch Egan, who's one of our featured photographers. It's got our sizes. We spent a lot of time figuring out fonts, which is not something I would have expected. But the newspaper that we were researching from the 80s and 90s used very specific fonts for the headlines, for the body, and for the captions. And we wanted to replicate that to really make it feel like you were in a newspaper, all the way to the object on the top left, which is a giant newspaper that visitors are greeted by when they first walk into the gallery. So next we have printing, framing, and installation. This was this could have been a very challenging aspect of this exhibition if it were not for the man that you see, who may not look so happy in that image, but he is very happy. That is the last print rolling off the printer. His name is Paul Carey Goldberg. He's an excellent photographer from Gloucester. We had never done this before. You know, I wanted to start this presentation by saying we're not photographers and we're not journalists. We're definitely not curators. And we had never printed photographs and done this level of work before. So Paul had begun volunteering a few months prior. His interest in the photo archive was piqued, and he helped out with that a lot. And when it came time to try and decide how many photos we could actually put in this show, we really needed an object to hold in our hands to say, this is the size that we want to make these photographs. We didn't want to go too small so that they wouldn't be visible to the visitor. And we didn't want to go too big so that we couldn't have a lot of these in there. So Paul, on his own time at home, printed out one from his home computer. And it was stunning. It was perfect. It was exactly what we were looking for. But it was just one. And so we turned to a company that did us a couple of test prints, and you know, they turned out not exactly what we were expecting. They didn't quite have the depth and the energy and the emotion that we were seeing in these images on the screen. And they were also, you know, if we wanted to get the really nice versions, it's slightly out of our price point. So we were talking with you know, one of the photographers, and they were looking at the test prints, and then they just out of the corner of their eye saw this one that Paul Carey Goldberg had done just a month prior. And they said, well, that one looks great. Why don't you just do that? And so I said, okay, yeah, that's a good point. So we asked Paul if he would print all 200 of these, and he graciously agreed, but we needed to buy a printer to do so. So we bought this Epson that you see on the left, and it was an absolute workhorse and worked wonderfully for this purpose. We had to go through a few of them before we got the right machine, but it was beautiful once we did. So here we are on the top left framing. Paul was able to train a group of interns to frame the 175 prints that we have in this exhibition. And there are two of them right now on the left viewing their handiwork. And on the right, the first panel has come in, and that's the infamous Paul Bilodeau that I mentioned earlier. There he is as his 22-year-old self, and then he was as he is today. So it was great to start to see things come together. Here is some shots from the gallery install. You see on the bottom right, those are kind of our captions that I was talking about. We were able to really replicate that look, and it made for a very clean display. You know, this exhibit has a lot of words. The research process, I think, ended up being about a 60-page Bible that we were working from, that we had to condense down to something a little bit more legible. And so these captions really made it clean for people to know exactly where to look for who the photographer was, what the date was, and then what the subject of the image was as well. Here we have our assistant curator, Leon Doucette, who is hanging our back wall collage. Megan, do you want to speak on what this wall kind of represents for the exhibit?
Yeah, I can. So, in a nutshell, as we've mentioned, the core of the show is focusing on those full-time staff photographers that came after Charlie Lowe. But as we were going through the literal tens of thousands of prints and negatives, a lot of other names were popping up, and we weren't totally sure how these folks played into the story that we were telling. And as we learned more about the newspaper and photojournalism, we came to learn that there are many instances where the full-time staff photographer is not available, or it's an all hands on deck situation, like a major event. So occasionally there's a fill-in photographer, or even just another staff member who grabs a camera and takes a photo for a story. So we were trying to come up with a way to illustrate this concept within the show, and we came up with this collage salon style wall in the back. So the left side leans towards the GDT staff examples of their work, and then on the right are fill-in photographers. Am I missing anything?
No, I think that covers it. I think I probably should have pointed out that GDT is an acronym for Gloucester Daily Times. I'm sure you've all figured
Yes.
that out, but we've just lived in GDT world for so long that it just kind of rolls off the tongue. So here's a fun project that we actually picked up from the Boston Athenaeum. They had a photograph show happening right around the time that we were doing this installation. And one of their really successful aspects of that show was a lightbox display. And so they were kind enough to share with us some of those details. And here we are kind of measuring our space to make sure it'll work. And we'll show you some finished photos towards the end. We had to make sure that we had enough room. There's an emergency exit to the right, and then there's a fire hydrant to the left. So we had to make sure that we could fit this safely in between all of that. So now we have more installation shots. Here comes the giant newspaper. This came the day before the exhibition opened. We did not get to see it in production, so there was really no telling how this was going to go. It was definitely a moment of truth as they were bringing it in, but it turned out really well. And I have to point out that this photograph that you see, for us, represents a lot of things. It was, at its core, it represents kind of what the photojournalist has to do. If you can't see it clearly, we'll show a bigger image later. But they are, standing out in a blizzard while giant waves crash, early in the morning, getting this shot for the newspaper. We were able to find the negatives for this. We had seen it on the front page of a newspaper, and we scanned it at as high a resolution as we possibly could. The scan itself, I think, took about 20 minutes because it was
Maybe more.
Yeah, it was getting every single detail. And when they went to blow it up, it still wasn't good enough. And so we actually had to go back, and Leon was able to use AI very strategically to combine pixels on areas that were too blurry to enlarge. The funny story is, behind the man who's getting in his vehicle, there's a road sign that says one way, and the top of it, there's like a little like pole sticking out, and the AI thought it was a face, and so it actually put a full human face on it, which was terrifying to see. And so he had to go back and train it that it wasn't a face, it was just a pole. And this is my favorite photograph. The top is that mock-up that I had shown earlier. This was our designer's original envision for how that would be. And the bottom is a photograph by the staff photographer the day it was going up. A true moment of art imitates life. The photographer had never seen that initial mock-up from the beginning, so it was kind of magical that these two aligned so well. And here we are the day before opening. Another side project that we did for this exhibition was we partnered with the newspaper to create our own broadsheet. What better way to finish 2 years worth of deep research into journalism and photojournalism than to make your own newspaper? And so the broadsheets arrived the day before opening, and here we are celebrating their arrival. We sent these out in a single issue of the Gloucester Daily Times to all their subscribers, and we also got a few extra 1,000 copies for people to grab from the galleries. So it acts as a bit of a deeper dive into some of our content that one may not want to read on the gallery walls. So I want to take a quick deviation to actually focus on what this subject is and who these people are. So here we have the photographers of the Gloucester Daily Times, 1973 to 2005. And going from top left to bottom right, I just want to name them all because we have come to know them all as really good friends. Charlie Lowe was the initial staff photographer from 57 to 81, followed by Jim Mahoney. Jim Mahoney was there from 81 to 83 and went on to have an excellent career at the Boston Herald for over 36 years. Ken Schrader and Mitch Egan, followed by Amy Sweeney on the top right. Amy Sweeney was the newspaper's first full-time staff photographer. And an interesting aspect of how this research came together, we knew that Jim had left in 1983 and we knew that Amy had arrived in 1985, but we did not know what happened in between those two. We asked Jim, he said, I have no idea who came after me. We asked Amy, she had, I have no idea who came before me. And finally, I would say maybe 2 months before the show opened, we found a couple of boxes deep in the photo archive that had these two names on them. A few Google searches and Facebook searches turned up Ken and Mitch, and they were very happy to talk with us and help us out for the show. Mitch in particular said, you know, this was 40 years ago. I worked there for less than a year. Bear with me if my memory struggles a little bit. And I can totally imagine that if I were to get called, you know, now for a job that I worked, you know, 5 years ago for less than a year, it would be challenging to remember, but he was excellent assistance. Middle left, we have Kristen Gisler, then Paul Bilodeau, who is the man that we've talked about a few times. Desi Smith in the middle was a stringer, a part-timer, was there for over 30 years off and on. We have Josh Reynolds, Mike Dean on the middle. Bottom left, we have Jessica Steigels Murray and Mary Muckenhaupt Roy. Jackie Bennett in the bottom middle. Sally O'Malley. Sally was a correspondent for one of the towns outside of Gloucester's coverage, or inside of Gloucester's coverage, but outside of Gloucester. And then we end with Bart Piscatello on the bottom right, who worked in production, but actually just enjoyed taking photographs so much that he got a lot of them in the paper. And so I just want to show you a few of their works, one from each photographer. This one is by Charlie. It's an extremely beautiful photograph. It looks like, you know, the beam of light coming in with the smoke. This was a hearing on gas stations, which I think is just very exemplary of what a photojournalist has to do in listening through the mundane and waiting for that moment in which they can really bring it to life. We have Jackie Bennett capturing a real late 70s, early 80s Gloucester scene of men sitting on the cartons outside of the shop. Jim Mahoney's view of a vessel off in the ocean. This was Ken Schrader's view. We picked this one for a few reasons. Soon after, they switched to wire lobster traps. And so this view of these wooden ones was really, was kind of an important time in Gloucester's history. The Ken also came from one of the southern states. And so while he was there for the job, he said that the snow was really impactful for him. He hadn't experienced anything quite like it. And so he's got a lot of photos in his archive of the snow. Mitch Egan with this well-composed image. One of the underlying themes that we had in the exhibition was a deep look at the fashion and kind of the changing styles of the eras. And so this one, you can't help but feel the late 1980s with the acid wash jeans on the man on the left, as well as the mullet that he's rocking. I feel like there's a windbreaker and some pretty large glasses on the woman on the right. It just definitely puts you in that moment. Essex, Massachusetts is definitely known for its clams. So we showcase one of the very famous stands there by Sally O'Malley. Here's our feature image again. This was not, if any of you know, the perfect storm. This was the one that happened a year later, which by many accounts was equally devastating. And it happened in the midst of snow as well. So Another snow shot. I swear the entire exhibit is not just a bunch of snow shots, but I seem to have picked them for this one. Another great Gloucester scene outside of St. Peter's Club. This is one that when we put it on the wall, we actually didn't know who any of these men were, but since then we have been able to identify all of them solely based off of the community members coming in and sharing with us who each of them are. This is such a great photograph and such a great story. This was by Desi Smith, who was a stringer, and this is at the Little League World Series, and this kid, Billy Powers, clearly missed the ball. And if he would have taken a millisecond earlier, the ball would have been hidden behind his glove or his leg, and it was just the perfect moment where the reaction is fresh. Billy's parents saw Desi, and this is an example of what it means to be a local photojournalist as well in the community that you live and represent. They actually came up to him after the game and because I knew who he was, and asked him not to run the photograph. They said Billy is devastated. He would be so embarrassed by all of his friends if they saw this in the front page of the paper the next day. And Desi, knowing that he got the shot, but Desi also being a wonderful person, did not run it. And he held on to it, and they ran a different photo for that day's coverage. And then about a week later, he gets a letter in the mail from Billy's parents saying, Billy's recovered now, you can run the photo. And so they were able to put the photo in the paper about a week later, and they suggested a caption of something along the lines of Billy Powers, who had an excellent series in the field for the A's, missed this one. And so that's actually the caption that we put on the exhibit as well. Here we have a photograph by Josh Reynolds. Josh Reynolds was the staff photographer from 1996 to 1999. Throughout the show, we talk about the evolution of the technology as well. So we begin with Charlie's 4x5 Graphic, and then we go through 35 millimeter. We also have a moment in which we touch upon color photography. That happens in the newspaper later than color photography exists in the community or in technology. And so we look at that. We also look at the transition from film to digital. And so in Josh's case, he's there towards the end of color film. The shot was taken about 1999, and they'll switch to digital in 2002. But Josh is a self-described risk taker. Here he is on the top of a mast, parallel with the woman who's also up there, and he grabs this excellent shot. Mike Dean's one of the early digital photographs of a protest. The show does not tell a clear kind of direct history of the community, but it tells a lot of these really important moments. In this case, the fishing industry was protesting a lot of the regulations that had been put upon it over the years. This is one of my favorite photographs in the show. The label reads something along the lines of Rockport residents raise their hands in favor of approving if alcohol can be permitted in Rockport. And you see everybody unanimously and enthusiastically raising their hands. We've had a lot of people go through the show and say, oh, there I am, or there's, what's his name? So it's a very fresh moment as well. And then this one is definitely a fan favorite by Jessica Stiegels Murray. This perfect capture of a child definitely not having fun. So now we're at opening day. So all of this work has led to December 1st, 2023. And we realized that one of the best pieces of coverage that we had was the paper that we were exhibiting. So they've been wonderful partners. They put us on the front page here on the right and really help get the word out about this exciting exhibition. A few gallery shots so you can kind of see how everything came together. You can see the giant newspaper that greets people as they first walk in. You can see the collage wall in the back, a lot of our sections throughout. We have a whole wall in the perfect storm. We have some cases that we'll look at here closely in a second. This fun interactive on the right is called the photo assignment. One of the things that we learned throughout this process is just what it meant to be a photojournalist. Yeah, I think that there was a time in which the photographers at a newspaper were considered the reporter's photographer, and they were told, what to go shoot. And there was a moment in which they said, well, don't just tell us what to shoot, tell us what the story's about. And so they incorporated that into their work, and they were able to, enhance a story by capturing these great images. And so in this photo assignment interactive, we actually asked visitors to write down what their story is about, and we hope to compile a few of these and get them run in the paper as well. On the left, you'll see one of our first cases showing the early, early for this exhibit, 35mm cameras. There's a cornucopia of film that you can see spilling out on the right side as well. A couple of cases as well. The top left is the Charlie Low case. So it's got his Graflex, it's got his Nikon F on the top right. It has a few of the prints. And then on the bottom right is one of my favorite cases because it really helped me understand the process of the darkroom. And so, I understood loosely how to develop film, but the contact sheet was very mysterious for me. And so we were able to get this in larger. And that really showed, the way in which you're putting your film down and having the light burn it onto the contact sheets. The contact sheet for the newsroom was king. It was so helpful for the editors to be able to look at that sheet and say, this is the photo I want. And they were, you can see a lot of these contact sheets have that orange crown mark on them to say, this is the one we want to go to print. It's not very easy to see, but the print that we have chosen that's in this case is one by Jim Mahoney. And we chose it because it's an exaggerated version of what I was told is called the Fist of God, in which Jim was holding his hand directly over the subject of that and really burning the edges. I've heard it called a few different things, but that really highlights the subject at the center and burns the edges around it. And we have the digital case. What you're seeing on the top is a scanner on the left, which some of you may recognize was that transition period where they were still developing their film, but were scanning them into computers and doing the editing there instead of making the prints and the contact sheets. Some of the great cameras on the bottom there from Josh Reynolds. Almost all of the photographers were still had a lot of their old cameras from the time that they worked there, and they were eager to share those with us for this show. And you can even see in the background we were able to grab an honor box, which is the old newspaper rack. That was really fun to put together. Again, one of the favorite parts of the exhibit, we showed you earlier the early stages of this. This is the finished product of our light box. So in the light box itself, on the tray there, you see duplicated negatives from the perfect storm. And people are able to track those and compare them to the contact sheets above. You see the circled selection, which leads to the print, which leads to the finished product in the newspaper. It's a very simple process, but I think for a lot of visitors, it has really helped them understand, what goes into putting a photograph on the front page of a paper. And this is my favorite photograph of the entire show. So this is everybody. This is all of the photographers that we worked with, we exhibited. They were all able to come. 2 of them have passed away, but the rest were all there. They're wonderful human beings. Maegan and I both shared with them on opening weekend that the worst part about this show is that, we won't get to work with them regularly anymore because the job is done. But it was a true pleasure to work with them. We felt very honored that they trusted us with their story. Some of them were a little hesitant at first to understand what we were doing, but they were all just immensely helpful in putting this together, and we could not have done it without them. So that's our story, and thank you. We're definitely willing to answer any and all questions. We have our contact information here. We have at the bottom, and I'll send these links around as well, just some more information about us. The bottom one is the online database that will allow you to kind of dig through these 15,000 images. Very early stages, but it's great to see. And the exhibit is open until March 17th. So we have 6 weeks from today left. So please come up and visit. Maegan and I give tours every Thursday afternoon at 2. We have a lot of great programs coming up. In about a week and a half, we have a curator from the MFA, Kristen Gresh, coming up to speak about Life magazine, the exhibition that they did there. And an interesting coincidence, Life magazine ceased its publication December 29th, 1972. Our photo archive and then turn our exhibit begins 3 days later. So there's definitely an interesting continuum of images and styles through that. And that's kind of what we have. So thank you.
Thanks, Trenton and Megan. That's a wonderful look at the photographers and the images and how it all came together. So before we take questions, let's unmute and give them a round of applause.
Oh, thank you.
Bravo.
Fantastic. I saw a couple of questions come in through the chat during the presentation, and Audrey was wondering if you could go back to the image of the list. Audrey, was that the list of the computer files?
Yeah, I
image?
wanted to make a screenshot, but I couldn't remember which
Sure.
keys to hit to take the screenshot, because I found it really useful as a tool to for any archive.
Yeah, and I'm happy to actually even just circulate this as a PDF afterwards to your group if you're interested in kind of seeing through everything.
Fabulous.
Yeah, and we're still perfecting that process. It's a trial and error in a lot of cases to figure out what works. Like I mentioned early on, we had sorted things by date, and then when you realize that there are two different photographers shooting two different events on the exact same date, how do you work out from there? And so we had to start incorporating their names, whether it be through initials or things like that. Luckily. So our exhibit covers the years 1973 to 2005, and I didn't speak to this. The reason we stopped in 2005 is because that's when they fully switched to digital and started ingesting all their photographs into the database they use still today. And so the intention of this gift was to protect the physical media, and that stops with CDs in 2005. So in their database, which they gave us access to kind of help this process, they do have a naming structure that we're actually trying to work into ours as well, and so that it's a consistent kind of system throughout.
Great. David Halberstadt is asking, can you name your technology and why you chose the scanner or the printer?
Yeah. So the printer was recommended to us. We had an old Epson, and I can look up exactly which one. It's a P900, I believe. There were a few of the photographers who had worked with it that they really enjoyed it, and got great reviews. It was in our price range. We are a nonprofit, so we don't have an endless budget, but it was one that we could tell did professional printings and was also affordable. For the scanner, that was a legacy purchase as well. The previous photo archivist had the Epson 10,000 XL.
Mhm.
And it had finally reached the end of its life. The beauty of that scanner is it does both, manuscripts and it does transparencies. And so it has a scanner on the bottom of it and it has a scanner on the top. And that was really great. It did bulk, which was something we wanted. So we were able to upgrade that thanks to generous funds that was allowed to get us the 12,000 XL for that too. And then Cortex, which is the system that we've used to display all this, was chosen after a lot of trial and error online databases. Something that is a struggle for the library and archival field is to find a system that works across formats. Many of them are great for library books. Many of them are great for archival materials or the archival finding aid and different series that can break down from that. This was one that we found that really just worked with everything. Very, very adaptable. So we've been very happy with that.
Dick Coolish just said that the Museum of Printing in Haverhill might have information about the plate making machine.
Yes, and while I was not able to speak with them, one of the things that we don't show in this or in this presentation is we put together a side exhibit called the Early Newspapers of Cape Ann, and that looked at everything kind of leading up to the Gloucester Daily Times. So the first newspaper arrives in Cape Ann in 1827 as the Gloucester Telegraph, and it's not until 1888 that the Gloucester Daily Times arrives. And so the previous librarian and archivist, the person that actually had my job, I gave her that assignment, and she went really deep into figuring out kind of everything during that era. And I know that she reached out to the Museum of Printing to get a lot of information as well.
That's great. Bernie Zelich had a question. Bernie, do you want to ask it? It's kind of specific. Basically, he's saying that the fist of God in the vignetting in the late 70s, he worked at newspapers where
Oh,
his
great.
job was photo editor. I don't know if you can see the comment.
Yeah.
He ordered what was called keyholing for nearly every photo.
Huh.
And he's come across the term keyholing ever since.
Yeah, it's each photographer has a different style, and I think so. Jim Mahoney is the one that really used this exaggerated, dodging and burning more or less. And every time he just says, like that was the style at the time. That was the style at the time. Because I think he's a little, like he notices how exaggerated it is now. And it's just, that's what everybody was doing at that moment. But keyholing. Yeah, there was someone who did mention something along the lines of they had a cardboard sheet more or less, and they poked a hole in it, and then when they moved that around, that was kind of what was just burning that image specifically. I've also heard of things like rubbing like eraser shavings on a photograph to get certain depths and textures on it while they were being burned. So yeah, it's interesting.
That's really cool. Andrew Barr. Andrew, do you want to ask something and state something else? We're coming to the end of the question session. So
just a quick question. Have you guys thought of doing something online, making these available online?
Yeah. Yeah, a few different ways. So, the first and foremost, we're endlessly trying to get all of these 1 million negatives scanned. The trick of it is also something that we didn't speak too much, is that we did have to edit these a decent amount, and so to just scan 1 million negatives is going to take us a few decades.
Oh, sure.
But also a lot of them are scratched up, a lot of them have their own levels of damage, and they don't go through that process of what a photographer does in the darkroom or online. Like the negative is the rawest version of a photograph, and
Yep.
so much of what ends up being the art that they make happens afterwards. So even when we do get these all online, we're going to make sure that we put this caveat saying like these are the unprocessed versions of them.
Right.
We have put together a few small online exhibits that looks at each photographer on that Cortex site that we'll send the link around. My hope is that before the show ends, or as the show ends, that we can put together a full one-to-one kind of story of the exhibit. We'll definitely do a recording of the gallery because the way in which it's been laid out is really, really quite nice.
Okay. Just to quickly say that I'm with the town of Mansfield, Mass. Our newspaper covered Mansfield, Foxborough, and Norton, from the 1800s on. And I haven't done a show like yours. That seems beautiful. A lot of work to put that together. We've just been posting photographs on Facebook on the
Yep.
Mansfield history site. And the good thing is that you'd get the same thing. People from around the world that are from Mansfield will go on and tell you who these people are in these images.
Yes.
So keep that in mind.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly right, though. I mean, there are a lot of, Gloucester memory groups on
Yeah,
Facebook,
sure.
and we've had some people post things on there that have gotten perfect success. Like there's a photo of kids in the show at a playground, and there's like 10 kids on there. You can't really see all their faces clearly. I would say within an hour of it being posted, everybody was identified.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the beauty of it. But to speak to your point about, these different newspapers across the country, something that we feel with this show is that you could really pick it up and put it anywhere. You'd change out the photos, you change out the names. But what we tried to do with this exhibit was make it not so you have to be from Gloucester to appreciate what the story is.
Right.
There's this underlying story of the technological advancements. There's this underlying story of, the state of newspapers and kind of the ebbs and flows. We talk about when the newspaper gets sold, how that affects people, what the struggles of being a photographer are, being on call all hours of the day, having to go out for the fire at 3 a.m., having to go to the baseball game when it's a slow news day. And then we leave the exhibit at the very end talking about the current state of local journalism. We do have a stat on there that says, each week, 2 daily or weekly newspapers close each year. I'm sorry, each week. leaving 20% of the country in a news desert. And so there is no local journalism to report on their community. And that leads to endless amounts of issues. And so the Cape Ann community is very fortunate that this paper still exists and still has high quality images on its front page each day, but that cannot be said for everywhere.
That's I live in a town that has the Lowell Sun. It's been going for quite some time, and they're still print. They have digital access, which is what I have, but long history. Great old building with a huge sign that says the Sun at the top as you come over the bridge. Jeff Siderman said that he started as a reporter at the Daily Kennebec Journal in Augusta, Maine in 1972. And sometimes they just needed a photograph, so they'd give him a speed graphic with a single film holder.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, that's just 2 shots. And they said, that should be all you need. And his editor rarely used them, but contact sheets, but he would hold the negative up to the light with a loop and just
Yeah.
look
Yeah, I think the good ones can do that. Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that, Charlie Lowe, who's the first photographer featured in this show, started off with that. And by the time he gets to 35 millimeter film, he's still treating it like he's got those 2 shots. He's very intentional with his captures and does not take a lot. And so his photo archive, even though he, had more years, is actually smaller than others, because it just depends on the photographer. Some of them go in there and they're just, clicking away and getting as much as they can because they know they're going to do that work later on in the darkroom. So yeah, that's interesting.
Can I respond?
Sure.
It trains you to know what you're doing, to be prepared, and to get what you need to get as soon as you can, because you never know if you're going to get another shot. After I left the Kennebec Journal, I became a film stringer for Channel 6 in Portland. And you show up, and the first thing you do is you get your establishing shot. You don't know what's going to happen in the event, but you got to shoot something.
Yeah.
You're professional. You're paid to come back with something.
Right. Well, and one thing that we touch upon in the exhibit is the switch to digital and how that changes everything too. One of I think the unexpected things for the newspaper was that they thought that they were going to switch to digital and have no more problems. Well, then they had to store these images, and then they had to have hard drives, and then they had to have all this space where these tens of thousands of images were rolling back into. So yeah, it's an interesting point. You say you got to get the one that is good, and then you elaborate and get the more artistic or dangerous shot, I guess, after that.
Right. Well, they're holding space for you, or not in an official way, but Jeff's going to come back with a picture about such and such, and possibly a story. And you don't want to go, well, nothing really interesting happened. That's not the way it works.
Yeah.
That's a few more questions just before.
Thank you for taking my comments.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. That's great. Stephen Shore was just saying that from 1920 to the 80s, there were a whole raft of different masks that you could dodge and burn images with when you're in the dark room. John Dockery is asking, are you aware of, and does your museum need old projectors and devices like postcard projectors for your exhibits or your research?
Interesting. Maybe. I know John was kind enough to get us a stereograph viewer last year that was really beneficial to use of those cards in the galleries. Yeah, I'd be interested in connecting and seeing what you have. It's our library and archives. We open up to students as well, and so it's always nice to have these things that help show how these things can be viewed.
Someone is asking, will there be any availability of the 19th century photographs?
Right. So that's the interesting part of this collection is it really starts in 1973, and before that it's just gone. We think that it was primarily thrown out at some point, whether it be through an office cleanup or whatever it may be. The Gloucester Daily Times didn't start putting photographs in its paper until with regularity until the 1940s. You'll see a little bit trickle in for World War I. You'll see some in the 1920s. There was an anniversary celebration that you see a lot for World War II, and then popping up more with Charlie Lowe. The convenient part of this is that the museum's collection of photographs covers that time period. Otherwise, for various reasons, a lot of the photos that have been donated to us in the past really kind of cover everything up to the 1960s. So together with this new photo archive, we do have a good span. And like I mentioned earlier, the Fred Buck, the previous photo archivist, had scanned a lot of those glass plate negatives. And so those represent, I think, about 15,000 already scanned photographs. So we are in the process of taking those from that singular computer and getting them on Cortex, many of which are up there now. So I would say, yeah, I don't know how many, but maybe 5,000 or 6,000, I think. So a good sampling already.
Great. One last comment. Audrey Gottlieb said that she was a stringer in the 80s for Western Queens Gazette in Astoria in Queens, and just saying how great to see how much you appreciate newspapers and the team.
Yes, I mean, it's funny that, I think by the end of this, I definitely have a new appreciation for the work that goes into it. Every time I pick up a newspaper, I'm looking to see, the caption to see who took the photograph. You definitely have a greater appreciation for the time that's spent into getting that image. The most impactful comments and feedback that we've gotten from this show, the ones that mean the most to us, have come from the people who have done the job, who have said things along the lines of, like, you can tell you really understood what this was all about. And so that's the biggest compliment that we could get, and we really cherish those.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's extraordinary to be able to work with that many folks who were present at the time and made the images while you're producing and the exhibit, and to have them there to see it must be really amazing.
Yeah, opening night was very, very powerful. So that was nice.
Added
because
help, but
again,
added pressure.
Yeah, well, exactly. And a lot of the thing that I said earlier of, newspapers are there to focus on the next day. And once your job is done, and you're focused on the next story and the next issue. So rarely do they get to have this moment to reflect on their body of work, particularly for this large of a scope. And so I think for them, it was very meaningful to be able to see how much people appreciated what they did.
Just one last question that we have time for. Audrey is asking, are you open tomorrow? And when did you think that Kristen Gresh is coming to speak?
Very good questions, important questions. No, the museum is never open on Mondays. Our hours are Tuesday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then on Sunday from 1 to 4. Kristen is coming a week from this Thursday, so that would be the 15th of February. It's an evening talk, I believe at 6 p.m. And there are still some seats available, so you can find that on our website at capeannmuseum.org/events.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it should be a really enjoyable presentation. If any of you saw the Life magazine exhibition, it was excellent. It definitely served as inspiration for us as well.
Thank you. I'm definitely coming. I don't know when. I can't wait to see it. Looks amazing. Thank you both so much, and for sharing this incredible project.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So much work to still be done. It's like amazing, just an amazing project. So thanks, guys. Thank you everyone for attending. One more round of applause, and then
Thank you.
we hope you'll join us at other presentations in the future. We'll keep you, you're both members for a year, complimentary
Oh, right.
PHSNE. So yeah, we look forward to seeing you again, and thanks again. And we're going to spend a few minutes just for people to say hello to each other before we close, so feel free to stay around. Yeah, I'm so thankful that we were able to share this with PHSNE. So really appreciate that.
Thank you all. We'll talk soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Well, if no one
So-
is speaking, I have I guess a related comment. I found it very surprising that nothing was saved before 1975. And I wonder how many, and I'm talking about our society and this group here, what can we do to have whatever warehouses may still house images, try to preserve them, even though we may not be able to get them digitized or anything like that, but at least not have them, fill up a waste management container. So,
well, some of the processes that you saw, Megan.
well, I mean, financially or
Yeah.
outreaching, how do we do that? That's more of what
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the actual, but things that may still have survived a takeover or a bankruptcy of a newspaper, but it didn't get thrown out,
Mhm.
but are just warehoused somewhere, or they're in a museum somewhere and they're so poorly cataloged or cataloged or moved around incomplete manner that somebody will say, we need that 1,000 square feet, sift through it, you two interns, and throw out the stuff that can be thrown out, just saved, and they may not save things. But I don't know how you get the word out. The guys in Michigan may have more experience with it. I'm not an archivist, but but Andrew and Jeff and others who have worked in the business, how do you go around and do you go through bankruptcies of newspapers that were active photographically and see what happened to their assets? I mean, is there a U-Haul type storage somewhere in some town USA that has it? There are always storage lockers that are left abandoned for years until somebody just said, throw the stuff out.
Stephen just commented, I don't know if you saw the American Photography Archive group.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I didn't know about, but
Mm,
look into.
okay.
Yeah, I'm a member of that group, and they're having a seminar the weekend of March 9th and 10th in New York City. It's going to be, if you go to their website, you could read about it and possibly, if you're interested, attend. It's not cheap, but it will be wonderful.
Yes, apag.us.
Mhm.
When I used to be with Polaroid, we had tried to create some sort of archival material. And one of the things that we found out while we were doing that was that the Library of Congress every 6 years would duplicate or resave everything that it has, either because the file format was aging and there would be sufficient compatibility for the latest version of the files, or because the media was disintegrating. So pretty much everything at the Library of Congress gets copied or resaved every 6 years.
Digital preservation is something that has to be planned for, and you have to be able to, over time and into the future, preserve file formats and provide access with, however possible.
It's not a short-term profit issue, but it certainly is, in hindsight, an important thing to be thinking about.
Well, you guys, I think we're going to close the meeting, but thank you, Sid, for bringing that up. And thank you, Jeff and Audrey.
Yeah, thank you, Audrey.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And next month, March 4th, is going to be Ken Huff on Deerdorf cameras. So he'll be presenting for us March 4th. So look for your snapshots announcement. And we will see you in March. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, John.
Dana.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Bye,
you,
Dana.
Dana.